Welcome to Evidence for the Exodus, a historical review. We are attempting to find out who is the Pharaoh of the Exodus, and in this particular episode, we are going to use the Bible to build a timeline to find out who exactly was the Pharaoh. Once again, this is part of a series of videos that we're doing on the Pharaoh of the Exodus. This week, we're going to be building the timeline to actually identify who is the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Next week, we're going to look at the archaeological evidence and compare it to what it says in the Bible. And then finally, we are going to be going over the typological significance of Pharaoh's tomb. So let's get started on today's topic. As discussed in part 1, it is estimated that Solomon's temple was built in 957 BC. Now, there's a passage in 1 Kings 6 that says it was 480th year after the Israelites came out of Egypt is when they began to build the temple. So one would think that it would be just a matter of counting backwards 480 years and finding out when the Exodus was. But there is a problem with this. Mainly that there is different chronologies for the Egyptian timeline. You have high chronologies and low chronologies. And for the New Kingdom period, this can be off anywhere between 30 to 55 years. Additionally, you may recall in the first 6 Kings passage that there was a little A icon, and that's because there is a copyist error in this specific passage. In the Masoretic text, which is the oldest manuscripts we have in the original language, it says 480 years. But in the Septuagint, which is Greek, which is what would have been used around the time of Jesus, says 440 years. Now, scholars usually use the Dead Sea Scrolls to break the stalemate in situations like this when it comes to the Old Testament. However, this passage has not been preserved in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the New Testament doesn't help us either. To my knowledge, there's no passage in the New Testament that quotes this specific verse. So this kind of frustrates our examination into this in the sense that it is not as easy as just counting backwards. However, we can use this to establish a general period and at least reduce our list of suspects. If you remember from last video, we're specifically looking for pharaohs by the name of Thutmose. So if we count backwards, we should be able to find which Thutmoses fit within this timeline. So if we take the date of 957 and add 480 years and 440 years respectively, we come up with a time period of 1437 to 1397. Now that leaves us with 2 potential pharaohs. That is Thutmose III and Thutmose IV. But I think we can do a lot better than this. What we should look for is, in the archaeological record, evidence of something that is attested to both by biblical sources as well as Egyptian sources, and see if we can build a more specific timeline from that. One of the pieces of archaeological evidence that you find from this period is called the Amarna Letters, and these are 300 plus clay tablets that were found in Egypt, and they date mainly to the time of Amenhotep III and the reign of Akhenaten. And these are diplomatic correspondence, including a series of them from an area known as the Levant, which we also know as Cana. Now, we're going to go over a few of these letters, and we're going to compare them to what's happening in the Bible at around this time. Within the Amarna Letters, you have a group of correspondence from the city of Jerusalem. Now, just a quick note on the structure of these letters. You will see that they will address the king and refer to another group as mayors. King in the Amarna Letters is in reference to Pharaoh. Mayors is in reference to the king of the city-state. So just bear that in mind. They will also start off by saying, "my son," and that is in reference to sun worship, which was instituted by Akhenaten. Now, what's interesting about this letter is that it's not from the mayor or king of the city. It's from a soldier who says he's at war with a group of people called the Abiru, who are taking every city. And there aren't cities that are remaining loyal to the king. All are lost. You need to send reinforcements right away. So the interesting thing is there's a lack of troops at this city, and there is no king, which is interesting when you look at the Bible. According to Joshua 10:5, the 5 kings of the Amorites, Jerusalem, Hebron, and so forth, marched out against the Gibeonites. The rest of the chapter goes on to describe details of how the Israelites and God ultimately defeated these 5 kings. And we have the list of kings that were conquered in Joshua 12. But we find in Judges 1:8 that they don't actually take the city until much later. So this would seem to be a correlation where you have a period, according to the Amarna Letters, where there's no king and they need troops. And then you have that corroborated in the Bible where the king fell, he lost his troops, and they didn't take the city for a period of time. Another Amarna letter talks about Gezer and that they were giving food and other refreshments, specifically that they were giving these stuff over to the Abiru and that they had been giving their land to the Abiru. Now this letter specifically states that this is a crime against the king and he's requesting military help to punish these other cities, which is interesting because according to Joshua 10:33, Gezer went up to help and Joshua defeated both of these armies until there were no survivors. And then we hear in Joshua 16:10 that they didn't dislodge the Canaanites from this city because they had made an agreement and they were giving tribute. In the Bible, it talks about labor, but it's not hard to imagine that they would have given some supplies as well. And here is a third example from the king or mayor of Megiddo. And he's writing to Pharaoh saying he's obeying his orders, that he is guarding the city by day using chariots in the field, and at night he's guarding via the walls. He's also saying that the war against the Abiru or Hapiru, I actually believe this is the Hebrews, is quite severe. Now, the interesting thing about these statements is that according to the Bible, he dies, but the city remains in Canaanite hands, which would make sense if he died in a field battle. So here's my ultimate conclusions on the Amarna letters. That these letters are in fact testifying to Joshua's northern and southern campaigns, which would make the Pharaoh of this particular time Akhenaten. So now, if we can establish a timeline and work backward from the time of Joshua, we should be able to figure out exactly who is the Pharaoh of the Exodus. If we were to scroll over to Joshua 14:7, we learn about a gentleman by the name of Caleb. Caleb was one of the spies that went in from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land of Canaan, and he was the one that went in with Joshua, and he gave a favorable report. Now, if you know the story, they ultimately did not go in, but Caleb was given a promise of land for when they did go in. And now he's saying, I'd like to collect on this promise. The Lord has kept me alive for 45 years since this promise was made. Here I am, 85. So we now know that 45 years has passed since they came out of Kadesh Barnea. We also can look back at Numbers 9:1 and find out that they spent 2 years in the Sinai desert prior to going to Kadesh Barnea. That gives us a total of 47 years from this conversation back to the Exodus. Another indicator that we can use is the age of Moses. Moses was 120 when he died, and shortly after, Joshua took the people into the Promised Land. We know that at the time of Exodus, he was 80 years old, and Aaron was 83 when they spoke with Pharaoh. So we are not talking about round numbers here. In either case, we can conclude it's about 40 years from the start of the Joshua campaigns back to the time of the Exodus. And now it's time for us to create our general timeline. So again, these are not going to be specific, hyper-specific dates. It's not going to be to scale, as where these are more general, rounded by year numbers. So first thing we're going to put up is the Amarna Letters, which happened principally during the time of King Akhenaten. And we know that Joshua was a parallel to Akhenaten because a lot of the letters were referencing sun worship. We know that this was 47 years back to the Exodus because of Caleb's promise when he went into Kadesh Barnea, 45 years prior to the end of the Joshua campaigns, which there was also another 2 years in Sinai. That gives us that 47 years. We are going to back that up with the timeline of Moses' life, which gives us the Pharaoh of the Exodus, who is Thutmose IV. Now, next episode, we are going to go into detail about the biblical criteria for the Pharaoh, and we are going to compare this directly to Thutmose IV. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that. Till next time.